But when you're focusing on a particular part of the electorate, look at where they are getting their news and information. Don't assume, find out. So, I think it's also, let me just get that one, younger people, they are on social media, it is just the reality. So we need to make the most of what we can do to inform that so they build the proper social media campaigns. A key part of any now modern campaign in Africa, or frankly in Europe, and again Michael Ashcroft alluded to some of this, is the candidate personality is becoming much, much more important than it ever was before. And I think I would set this out very clearly as the party, the tradition, the area you live in will relate to a particular party, perhaps. That brings voters to the table. It does not get them to the polling stations any longer. It maybe gets them to listen and that's it. It is building your candidate to reflect the voters and what we want to attract from the voters and achieve for the voters that is now the most important thing. And this goes back to our storytelling again, is tell the story of the candidate. Give them a personal relevance. I know many of you already do this, but I would say that this is growing in importance now. And the story needs to be credible and believable because we want those on social media, on the radio, on TV, at rallies to...
Likewise, Africa must leverage its agency, unity, and strategic assets to negotiate from a position of confidence. This session provides a platform for political, business, and civic leaders to interrogate how the Africa-Europe partnership can evolve into one of the fairness and foresight anchored in democracy, human dignity, and mutual accountability. The balanced alliance is not just an aspiration anymore. It is a necessity for shared prosperity and global stability, especially considering the geopolitical challenges we're facing for those of us that believe in pro-market Western values. So, to the panelists, here are the objectives. One, we want to examine the current state of Africa-Europe relations, identifying key areas of progress, persistent imbalances, and emerging opportunities for strategic realignment. Number two, we want to explore pathways to a more equitable partnership that moves beyond aid dependency towards mutual investment, trade diversification, and innovation-driven collaboration. Number three, we want to highlight the role of political parties. This is important. And democratic institutions in shaping a partnership rooted in shared values of freedom, accountability, and respect for sovereignty. Each of these key values that I've just mentioned are under serious threat.
Still, engaged in low-value activities, we're going to have a problem, and this dependency that we're seeing is not going to change. But from an ideological perspective, then, so what do we, or what does Africa's option? Because we feel, many of us in Africa feel that this European or Western model is not just in the economic space, but it's also in other aspects of our society. So if you see this, and this is basically where Africa is seen as a dependent and deficient in many other aspects, and therefore needs to be supported, given aid, as opposed to being treated as an equal. So there's always or rather there is that bias or that perception of Africa as a lesser partner. And so this, in terms of theory, but also as in academia, you have the dependency theory that looks at this very well, and also post-colonial studies that have tried to address this. But then, just to sum up, I would say, in modern day, this is what you can call the neoliberal model of economics, which, if you look at Europe right now, if you look at the Western economies right now, seems to be struggling. And therefore, a lot of people are calling for this neoliberal model to be re-examined and to see whether it's fit for purpose for Africa. If you look at countries like China with their Chinese capitalism with Chinese characteristics, then you start to see and ask yourselves, what then is the option for Africa? So I think I'll stop there in the interest of time.
Thank you for those insightful ideas in terms of how we should reshape them in Africa and Europe, especially with respect to global economic decision-making process. Now,
Kenya, I haven't seen a center for the study of Europe or any, at least from the social sciences side, centers that are interested in Europe-Africa relations. So mostly these are think tanks, the European think tanks that come here, have an activity, run a program, and then go back once a program is concluded. So again, lots of opportunities for joint research centers and hubs here. And also taking now into the mobility aspects, I think there's also a lot of programs that can be done to capacitate, whether it's students, faculty, and also researchers. Europe has a very interesting mobility model, the Erasmus program. And so what can be done so that, if you want this people-to-people understanding so that Africa
the value, and how can we attack this development and correct it? I think we have to focus on a long-term perspective. Where do we see each other in, let's say, 20 years? Let's think smart. Smart is
but what is it that China is doing that makes their own programs more attractive these days? I know part of the situation and challenges we have in Africa is this colonial legacy that still kind of influence some of the decisions of certain people in terms of dealing with pro-Western, pro-market economic system. And with respect to, of course, China had to shift from communism in terms of the market system of running the economy and adopt the Western style. But for some reason, when it comes to their influence in Africa, they seem to have an approach which seems to be attractive to so many African leaders.
Yes, as I said, it's for them it's a long-term approach, because I would still say it's socialism, but it's national socialism. So they're focused on their own benefit. They have nothing else in mind than their own benefit, and they like to. They don't bother, for example, about corruption. If corruption brings them to their goal, they don't care. And if they give the credit out that the other side will never be able to pay back, they don't care, and that's what is against our common values, to suppress the people in the long term. You have a long-term interest in them, not to exploit them. And
that's a question I would like us to have a special session on, because I see serious threats in so many areas, not only threats to the democratic principles and values that we believe in, threats to human rights values, threat to climate change, all of which is being. So now let's go to the last speaker, Luciani.
So this is where the moderator comes in. We have to stick to the time, so we have 5 minutes to wrap up. Thank you.
Yes, that's what we're doing now. Now let's go to Peter Annie. What does engaging difference mean for African relations, and how in cultural and foster empathy?
who and how or why should anyone provide more steps in the value chain? Because the people in Europe are benefiting from it. Why should they give it to you?
Yeah, we have to take the lead. That's true.
Thank you.
We have Jacob Wafula, green energy expert with extensive experience driving renewable energy innovations across the continent. Dr. Stephen Amoah, Member of Parliament and former Deputy Finance Minister of the Republic of Ghana, who's worked at the intersection of fiscal reform and enterprise development. Fana Norman Mukonza, Deputy Secretary General of the African Christian Democratic Party in South Africa, and a strong voice for democratic innovation and responsible governance. Together, we will explore how a centre-right vision can help Africa grow sustainably, not by choosing between prosperity. Experience in the field, what kind of innovations do you see bridging the gap between environmental sustainability and business profitability in Africa's energy sector?
Being the Kenyan, the panel, I want to start by welcoming my colleague panelists to Kenya and to Nairobi. Karibu sana. So to answer your question, solar energy is touted as one of the most ubiquitous source of renewable energy in the continent of Africa. And by way of its development and its deployment, it has proven to deploy the least cost of energy per kilowatt hour for most of the continent. And across the sector, we've seen numerous innovation. Firstly, its deployment coupled with battery energy storage, and we've seen the transition coming from lead-acid batteries to gel batteries, and now to lithium-ion batteries, and now the constant discussions around the concept of long-duration storage, such that you'd have energy that was generated from sunlight that's shone, let's say, on the 1st of January 2025, and you're utilizing that energy in October 2025. Green hydrogen is another remarkable innovation that's clearly driving us towards the climatic agenda of net zero. That is the catalytic split of the hydrogen and oxygen molecules in water by a process called electrolysis. And then you have this hydrogen gas that you can use it for electrical mobility and combining it with other molecules to be able to provide synthetic fuels and find numerous applications in difficult to abate sectors. Wheeling is another technology that we're grossly witnessing its adoption. We're running away from the constraint of physical space in the case of captive and rooftop solar, such that if Democratic Union Africa, for example, as an enterprise that is based here, can be able to purchase low-cost land in far-flung areas, 500 kilometers out of the city, and then construct a plant there and have that power wheeled all the way to Nairobi for its utility. Thank you.
Thank you for that very concise yet informative answer. So you mentioned wind, green hydrogen, and really the advancements we have in batteries over the past few years. Dr. Stephen, how can fiscal policy and economic reforms encourage responsible enterprise while promoting clean energy growth?
Hello. Yeah, thank you very much for this opportunity. I think this is a question that we should have been giving the whole discussing, because it's the actual problem of most African countries. I think in the first place, African countries should be able to develop a new paradigm shift that will ensure that first we have adequate tax capacity, or very big tax capacity, even before we can get into these areas. However, if we want to do what we are asking you to do, in the first place, we need to sanitize our fiscal space. What I mean is that most of the African countries I know, including Ghana, is actually operating what I describe as a negative effective tax rate economy. That is the amount that we generate every year through taxes. If we divide the said amount by all the houses in our countries, the amount that each house gets is far less than the amount that the government expends on these houses. So basically, we run ritual deficits. So if you want to really do what the question is asking, as a country, we should be able to position our country so that we can generate enough revenue domestically. Then we can embark on some of these incentives that will promote and encourage enterprises, because we have very weak entrepreneurial ecosystems in our countries. And also too, we are very vulnerable to most of these climate changes and other things, even though our emissions is less than 10%. So before we can do that as a country, we should be able to increase our tax capacity as a country, eliminate any form of actions and inactions and domestic policies that are actually impairing our opportunity to generate a lot of taxes, and not relying on debt GDP as a continent. In some of them rise as high as 70%. How can you come up with any tax exemptions to make sure that enterprises grow, even though it's in the right direction? So what I can say is that African countries should begin to look at this paradigm shift where our tax generations, the way we use these monies, our priority spending will enable us to have enough and also increase our tax capacities, and then turn to these enterprises and make sure that the enterprises themselves can expand. Because most of these enterprises are even rather small scale. So you realize that they are not even in positions to grow, to employ the masses, and to make sure that we become dependent as an economy. So first thing is, yes, how do we deal with this inadequate revenue generation as a continent, as countries? Two, how do we manage the Russian budget or a revenue that we generate to benefit these enterprises? And three, how do we also make sure that we put in place measures that will be good enough to make sure that our entrepreneurial ecosystems, the actors, the government themselves, the entrepreneurs themselves, and how are we using our resources to make sure that our tax generation will be purely out of production, not necessarily direct taxes, and also depend on loans and debts that are actually destroying our continent. That's what I can say for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doctor. So we should focus on generating domestic revenue that is still in line with our clean energy policies and yeah. Thank you. Hannah, how can faith-based and value-driven political movements contribute to the moral and ethical foundation of environmental stewardship?
Yeah, thank you very much for giving us this opportunity to respond to this question. So I think the foundation will be laid, and let me put it this way, is properly affirmed in the scripture. I'll just quote the scripture here, then you'll see the foundation is properly laid there. It says the Lord took man and put him into the Garden of Eden to work it, you underline that, and to take care of it. Now, what does this say to us? It says we are not owners of this world, but we are stewards. So once we understand that we are stewards of this environment and the land, then we will be able to influence policy direction to that land. Then the other scripture will be around where it speaks about God says, I put you to have dominion over the fish of the sea and the others, not to dominate each other. Because I think that is where we get it wrong. Because if God has given us the stewardship dominate the air, the fish of the sea and the others, but we turn it around, we dominate each other. I think if we do not respect our own people, how do we take care of this environment? So once we approach it that way, we will be able to understand that taking care of the environment is not a burden, but it's a sacred trust that will benefit all of us and the future generations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's a very valid point. Taking care of the environment is a responsibility of every single one of us so that we can have a future for the generations to come ahead. Thank you. We'll move straight into talking about how we can turn vision into action. I'd start with you, Jacob. What role can the private sector play in bridging the investment gap in Africa's clean energy transformation? This is a very important point to take up about the investment gap that currently exists in Africa.
Even before we introduce the private sector, I think governments first have to play their role to ensure that the stage is set, the rules are clear, they're fair, and they're implemented in a timely manner, so that we have clear rules and regulation on issues to do with tariff setting, for example. It's clear on what are the permitting procedures. Foreign currency ideation also need to be spoken into. And if, for example, I am a mini-grid developer, I want to be aware of what's going to happen to my investment when, for example, the main grid finally reaches. So on to your question, the role of the private sector predominantly would be that to ensure that financing comes on board, that we're able to translate policy into real infrastructure on the ground. And that we can do firstly by way of de-risking instruments, especially in volatile and very fragile contexts in Africa where it's almost practically impossible to put in place infrastructure because investments need clarity. They need to be assured that for every coin that they spend, this is going to they're going to recoup the investment. So de-risking infrastructure, like what the World Bank, for example, through the multilateral insurance guarantee agency is trying to do, will come a long way towards ensuring that these visions are actually finally translated. Further from financing, private sector also builds through independent power producers, original equipment manufacturers, and engineering, procurement, and construction companies. This is they deepen the value chain and creates numerous jobs in the sector. Private sector also buys, it purchases power. You have corporate entities like mines, data centers, agro-processing enterprises. These also have a role as key off-takers, and what this have to do is that they guarantee there's going to be demand for new plants that we ultimately develop. Also, on the facet of operation and maintenance, concessions to private companies ensure that power infrastructure actually does run and is actually profitable at the end of the day by way of optimization of operational procedures. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jacob. I think that was a very valid point. We have to now think about the role of government, like you rightly started off with, in actually providing a conducive environment for any kind of investment, whether it be local or international investment into any kind of industry that we're talking about. Also, what's very important, like you said, is stability. Nobody is going to put their money into something that is not stable. They don't know how they're going to get it out, if they're ever going to get it out. So that's quite right to start off with. The role of government needs to be very clear before we even talk about private sector coming into any matters. Thank you very much. Dr. Stephen, how can governments design fiscal frameworks that balance environmental sustainability with economic competitiveness?
Thank you very much. I think in the first place, there's a simple principle that even as an individual, you should be able to kind of adopt. You shouldn't spend more than you yourself have earned. First, every government should do. Secondly, if you are spending, spend with the intention that you generate something from what you are spending. So in the first place, every government should be able to spend on, embark on capital expenditure. And most governments, especially in the developing economies, spend on current expenditures. And at the end of the day, they run into debt as states, and they have to depend on IMF and other World Bank and international bodies. So I think government should begin to realize that I am spending within my capability, and I'm also making sure that I'm utilizing my strategic capabilities. Most African countries embark on subsidies. How can they be taking money from somebody and they're giving subsidies? You give subsidies based on what you have. So we need to look at that. And we should also think of making sure that we sustain our debt. If a country and your debt to GDP, in my opinion, moves beyond 50%, you know you're in trouble. So instead of having some sort of ceilings, we should have debt anchors so that your debt principle framework will be dealing with the growth of your economy. Once we are able to embark on these policies and make sure that as government, we are not spending beyond what we have, we will be able to create a needed balance. Of course, with the background of having this whole thing about environmental sustainability, where we are channeling our monies and creating this balance, we have in our minds that we also sustain our environment. So first thing is spend within your means and also make sure there's that sustainability and adopt that anchor rather than fixing ceilings. Some of them even have 65%. How can we survive? Once you're able to do that and create the needed balance, let me tell you, in my country, we spend about 3 to 4 billion on the monuments. And I can tell you, do we have productivity? If you talk of health sector, education and security, I think the others, we can really get 20% productivity. And these are areas that African countries and the government should look at so we can build our economy sustainably. This is what I can say. Thank you very much.
Fania, please can you explain or let us kind of give you some insight on how value-based leadership shaped African transition to a green economy that benefits all citizens?
Yeah, thank you very much. Value-based leadership is the compass that ensures Africa's green transition is not only economically sound, but ethically grounded. So leaders guided by integrity as number one, transparency and accountability that will create trust necessary for long-term investment and sustainable growth. And number two, such leadership will promote what we call ethical entrepreneurship, where innovation and profit goes hand in hand, number one, with social responsibility as well as environmental care. And the other one is that in our manifesto, I think last year, the 2024 as the ACDP, we were advocating for a free market tempered by social conscience, which can guide Africa's green economy by promoting the entrepreneurship in renewable energy, for example, which is solar and wind, and then while ensuring benefits reach underserved communities. So leaders can incentivize private sector investment in green technologies through tax breaks or subsidies, and ensuring that economic growth aligns with social equity and environmental sustainability.
Thank you very much. Thank you for touching on ethical entrepreneurship. I think that's something that I would like to discuss a bit further, maybe later on, maybe with the question and answer section of this panel discussion. We'll move on to the final section of this panel discussion. We're going to talk about responsible growth in a multipolar world. Jacob, how do you feel that Africa can become a global leader in clean energy innovation by 2035? Do you think this is an achievable goal? 2035, Africa becoming a global leader in clean energy innovation.
Just a bit of context first. The philosophy of the center-right political movement has always been that to uphold human dignity We have the family as the basic unit of political organization, has to be able to plan. And after planning, it has to make its own choices as a result of those planning. And that businesses, on the other hand, must be able to provide goods and services to their customers. Therefore, they have to invest. And governments, on the other hand, will have to maintain their role of keeping the promises that they make to their citizenry, to their electorate. If I was to maybe offer an idea that would frame the question that you just asked me, I would say that Africa, and by extension the Global South, is not going to decarbonize by way of deindustrialization, but rather by way of industrialization. And three questions that would be critical for us to analyze whichever pathway we follow or we go through is, one, are we providing affordable and reliable power to businesses, especially the small ones, and also for purposes of clean cooking? Two, are we crowding in private capital in ways that are through clear contracts that are procured in a transparent manner? And three, is the question of how we deploy these low carbon technologies that have the ability to mitigate against the projected effects of climate change. Are we doing that in a pragmatic manner? So back to your question, I would say that even before we talk about being a leader in renewable or green energy, it is worth to remind ourselves that this continent has actually done it before. In the last 2 decades, when other parts of the world were a lot more concerned with landlines and they were trying to finesse that, we had a surge in mobile telephony adoption on the Global South. And this led us to building an entire industry that even the original innovators of this industry never thought about: mobile money transfer. So then we have actually done it before, so we can actually do it. And how we do it, I think, is maybe twofold, I would say. One, we look at it as owning critical segments of the value chain. It started that Africa is home to many of these metals that are key to the green energy transition: lithium, copper, cobalt, you name them. But the trend, as has been the discussion of the previous panel, is that we are still exporting that. So we could leverage this, the abundance of these resources within our borders, and try to force through organizations such as the Africa Continental Trade Area, the processing of these materials, and we can be able to extract value 5 times of what we currently send out. 2 would be for us to leverage our competitive advantages. Africa, we are told, has abundance of renewable energy resources, of solar, the most ubiquitous one, wind, geothermal. We can actually leverage this to be able to produce the least cost of electricity per kilowatt hour, for example, and this would be able to attract high energy intensive industries on the continent. Thirdly would be to leverage on the surging or the bulging youth population of our continent. I think it's former scientific advisor to the British government, his name escapes me, postulates that by 2035, about 60% of the population of the continent of Africa is going to be made of young people of 25 years and below. We could leverage on this population growth and view it as our innovation engine and create training grounds specifically targeted at renewable energy sources: solar, battery energy technology, wind, green hydrogen, and so on and so forth, to be able to push further innovations in the different dimensions and sectors of the renewable energy space. And thirdly would be policy formulation. I mean, African countries have to compete for capital, I would say. Then it's going to be the interest of Africa to have policies that fasten the adoption of these technologies that are able to guarantee jobs and move us faster towards industrialization. A technology like green hydrogen, for example, accords us the opportunity to be able to export hydrogen gas, which green hydrogen gas, for example, which for so long had not been said. Look at the story of Namibia and how it is tapped in the European strategy of decoupling from Russia and de-risking from China, and the amounts of foreign exchange it's able to earn from exporting hydrogen, which is purely gotten from water resources within the country. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Africa is going to decarbonize by industrialization, not deindustrialization. And we must leverage all the natural resources that we have, that are green energy sources, and our teeming and growing youth population. That is really the way forward. And right, some of these policies that must also be placed in the system so that we can capitalize on what we already have. Spending within our means, like Prof also said. Yes. So Prof, I will go straight back to you, the doctor. What physical or economic reforms should anchor a future where enterprise and environment are mutually reinforcing? I'm just going to have to ask that you keep your answer brief so that we keep to time.
Okay, thank you very much. I think in the first place, one of the things that I've seen being lacked, that if we are able to correct that, to get this effective reform policy framework will be difficult, is that I've seen that in most African countries, when it comes to research and development and data with integrity-driven policy framework or fiscal policy decisions, is a very huge challenge. So in the first place, I think African countries should begin to accept the fact that you can never have any fiscal policy decision right when it's not based on data with integrity. You get bad results. So that should be the first thing. So you should begin to entertain that culture of research and development, data with integrity-driven decisions. And then two, we should open more doors and be very transparent when it comes to public-private partnership, especially those who are more developed than us. We have comparative advantages. We have the resources in terms of technology, finances. Some of them are ahead of us. If you come to Ghana, for instance, we have a lot of fiscal rules. I mean, the Form of Act, we have Public Financial Management Act 2016, we have Fiscal Responsibility Act 2018, and we even have PPP Act. And I think some other countries have. But when it comes to the enforcement of these acts, that's where we have challenges. So if we're able to eradicate corruption, we're able to build our fiscal policy frameworks based on well research and develop value chains and have the right data and build a very sound relationship with others based on our comparative advantages and develop the needed rules and laws and enforce them, I'm sure we'll be able to attain what you're asking. And this is what I think Africa will need as countries. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think what I got from that was the importance of data when it comes to fiscal policies. Not just any kind of data, data with integrity is critical. And transparency when it comes to PPP, which is public-private partnerships. Any kind of economy that wants to grow must be led by the private sector. Government can only do so much. Government's role is to provide the conducive environment and to act as a regulatory body to ensure that anyone who doesn't invest in anything is able to feel secure and get, like you said, ROI on their investment that can drive the economy. I would like to go to you now, Hannah. What core ethical or spiritual principle should guide Africa's long-term environmental stewardship? What are the core ethical or spiritual principles that should guide Africa's long-term environmental stewardship?
Yeah, so I think we can just maybe put the two words together. Ubuntu, that's number one. The other one, respect. So those are the core views, because Ubuntu speaks about inclusivity. You are because I am. Now, when that, because that can also speak to the stewardship that I started with, to say that Africa's environmental stewardship should be the moral duty of care, and then the stewardship that is rooted in respect for creation and responsibility for the future generations. So hence I spoke about the respect. Now, across our biblical values and African culture, heritage runs a shared understanding of humanity. It's not the owner of the earth, but we are the guardians. So once we understand that, then we will be able to move forward. So our forefathers lived in harmony with nature, guided by balance, gratitude, as well as the belief that what we take, we must replenish. We don't just take. And then today, we call for to restore the moral foundation where faith communities and civic leaders and cultural renewal come together to nurture a continental consciousness of sustainability, which is very important. By reclaiming our spiritual protect creation, Africa can lead the world and be the model of stewardship. And then lastly, I think we need also to think about intergenerational responsibility by encouraging green entrepreneurship while ensuring that economic growth does not compromise future generations across the resources. Now, the last one, many African cultures emphasizes living in harmony with nature and viewing the land as a sacred trust to be preserved for ancestors and descendants. This principle of intergenerational responsibility encourages sustainable practice such as rotational farming or communal resource management, which can be revived to address modern challenges like deforestation or soil degradation. I thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I think my favorite part of what you answered was when you referenced Ubuntu and what that actually means. You are because I am.
So it is the respect that you say that I live because you live, I am because you are. So basically we have, like, it's an element of inclusivity. So you cannot separate others from what you are doing. For example, what we see today in Tanzania and countries like your Cote d'Ivoire, Uganda, I think they need that element of Ubuntu because they do understand that for us to live together, we need to coexist. We need to coexist. So you cannot have a situation where others dominate others. That's why when I started with the dominion factor of it. You cannot dominate your own brothers and sisters. So you have to coexist. That's why I'm saying I am because you are. So that's the concept of Ubuntu. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I would like to now open the floor for any questions, please. Does anybody have any questions? I know that everybody's now looking at their watch and going to lunch. Any questions, please? Can we get the mic far left of the group, please?
Thank you very much for the panelists for that big insight. My name is Manuel. I'm the Solicitor of Media of Namibia. My question is just on what is needed to really move towards our environmental protection, especially for green energy. One of the findings of green energy is that your starting capital is very high. You have to put a lot for you to start producing it. And we are in small economy, especially as from Namibia that is trying to build and find some things like hydrogen and wind energy and so forth. And I'm hearing Dr. Amo, if I'm right, saying that we should look at taxes and so forth. How do you tax citizens in countries where they are already economically struggling? And how will you help them? Because in many countries, or maybe I did not hear that, but I think it's one of the challenges. But how do you really raise the starting capital for green energy? Also, in the issue of protections, we also find out that especially underground water when it comes to nitrogen is another challenge, because it's not totally harmful to the environment. In Namibia, we have a problem with our aquifers that might be polluted through producing of hydrogen, but also the exploitation already that we are talking about, the Africa-Europe alliances. You find out that because we don't have the starting capitals and to really go into green energy, big powers, the world powers are coming into the country, providing the resources, providing finances, providing training, and that is also coming with the cost of who's going to benefit at the end of the day. How do we address that issues?
Thank you very much for a very pertinent question. Sorry, could you please turn the mic? I'd like my brother there to kind of introduce himself so that we know who is speaking.
I say that I am Manuel Garingombe, the Secretary General of Democratic Movement, PDM Namibia.
Thank you very much. We'll take one more question, please, as we head out before we respond to this question. Anybody else have another question on green energy and Africa from what you've heard this afternoon? Or anything else you'd actually like to discuss when it comes to green energy in Africa and how we can move forward with this, because it is the way forward, to be honest. No? Okay, all right, so we'll go straight. We'll go straight to answering this wonderful question.
Yes, thank you, Emmanuel, for that question. I think you're asking on what is needed for us to be able to move forward towards implementation of green energy projects, and you cited the high capital requirements that are needed to start off projects like this ones. Firstly, from a center-right perspective, and from what I really dearly believe in, is that the idea is actually that we have to use what we have to get what we actually truly need. And that a transition that forces the people of the continent of Africa to preclude their abilities to industrialization, put food on the table, keep the lights on, is a transition that's going to be endured, and it's not a transition that is chosen by the people of the continent of Africa. But what we need really is money, is the financing bit, and there are really a number of innovative financing models that can be deployed to help us kickstart most of these projects. Power purchasing agreements, for example, for large-scale utility projects where you do not need to put in the capex upfront, but rather you have investors who can bring the money on board and you only pay for the power that your system produces. Green energy financing, the utilization of carbon credits for projects even before their actual construction is also another model that can be used. So that if, for example, you have set out to do a 20 megawatt peak solar PV plant, and this plant is projected to generate X million tons of carbon credits, you can, of course, sell it, albeit at a discounted rate, and use part of this money to inject it into the capex of the project. With regards to, I think you also had a question on green hydrogen. You mentioned the challenges to do with the quality of water. It is true that is one of the main challenges that green hydrogen production does face, because you have to get water, then take it through a process of electrolysis, and this water, the water that is required needs to be ultra pure. So this is a technology issue, but as we progress, we're seeing new innovative ways of membrane technology that are able to treat really high saline water. So I think on the technological front, we see a lot of advancements in this space. Thank you.
Yeah, just to get into the tax issue. I think he misunderstood what I said about the tax. I said where there is public and private partnership, we say there must be incentivized. So in terms of tax cuts. So I think I just needed to clarify that one. So it is not taxing them, but incentivizing those who are coming up with these great solutions. Thank you very much.
I think what I would like to say is that when it comes to Africa, greenhouse emission is less than 3%. I stand to be corrected. But in terms of being vulnerable, we need to watch out. I mean, felling of trees illegally, illegal mining, importation of gadgets that emit these carbon gas we all know in our country, and the climate change. I think we need to set our priorities right and put in place contingencies. Most of the time we talk about money, yes, but if you have the money and you don't have very efficient and effective framework, the money will come and your strategy will be a strategic drift. You don't get the results that we expect. So I think Africans, we know what we can do best practically to ensure that this whole ozone layer thing will not catch up with us, because we have a lot in place to work on. And as much as we need to get these priorities right, there are basic things we do culturally that we must stop. I mean, destroying water bodies because of illegal mining, felling trees illegally, importing old stuff and all these things. Let us stop these things so that small amount of money can help us attain our goals when it comes to dealing with this climate change. And this is all that I can say. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the question. Thank you to my wonderful panelists that are up here giving us insights into how we can now move Africa to green energy, and hopefully before our goal of 2035. Key takeaways that we have to use what we have to get to where we want to go. There are a number of financing models which you mentioned earlier on. I think it would be very interesting if we are able to share such information so that everybody else can see what these financial models are and how we can tap into it from our different various countries, what is available, so that we are able to drive this green transition. Very, very important about the tax incentives that you mentioned earlier on also. It's not about taxing or already struggling population. It's more about incentivizing this transition to green energy. And well thought through frameworks to ensure that whatever funds we do have are utilized properly, and there's transparency in how those funds are utilized, so that we can encourage more participation in green energy. Thank you very much. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you so much for participating. And we will now break for lunch. So please, again, those of us that are using our translation devices, please remember to leave them on the tables. Don't take them out with you. I will hand over to my wonderful colleague here to talk us through how long we're going to have our lunch break for, and any other housekeeping notices, Anita.
Thank you very much, Fatima. A round of applause, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, for the panelists. Please join us up here for a group photo. We could do better. I mean, thank you. Whilst at it, we're going to be out for lunch for 1 hour, 10 minutes. When we exit the conference room, our ushers are right in front of the gates to lead us to where we're having dinner. Feel free and join Nairobi and Kenya in every way that you can. And one of the best ways to do it is through their delicacies. As has also been announced, let's make sure we leave the gadgets behind. We are back here at exactly 10 minutes past 3 for the next session, which promises to be lovely, more interesting, and let me leave the rest for when the session starts. And on that note, I wish you an appetit. See you at lunch.
carbon.